Welcome to the Organic Advisor Call Series, episode 2 of this season. I'm your host, Sam Oschwald Tilton, and I'm the training specialist with OATS. This series is brought to you by the Organic Agronomy Training Service and Albert Lea Seed House. Albert Lea is a fourth-generation, family-owned, independent farm seed company with a full line of organic and non-GMO field crop seed and knowledgeable reps. Thank you, Albert Lea, for your support of this series, and I'll put a link to their website in the chat now. OATS, the Organic Agronomy Training Service, is governed by a consortium of universities, agronomists, crop consultants, nonprofit educators, and industry reps from throughout the country, and it's fiscally sponsored by the Organic Trade Association. These partnerships are at the core of the OATS mission. OATS provides science-based training for agriculture advisors. We're a collaboratively managed training program for ag advisors who work with organic farmers, transitioning farmers, and my new favorite term, organic curious farmers. We help to grow the domestic organic supply by strengthening the educational support network for agronomists, certified crop advisors, extension agents, and technical service providers. The aim of OATS is for every transitional and certified organic farmer to have robust access to technical service expertise that provides unbiased science-based agronomic support for their farming operation. This is our second episode of this season, and there are 2 whole past seasons of the series available on YouTube. Here's the link. We'll put it in the chat to our YouTube channel if you want to do some deep dives into past call series. OATS runs in-person training events, virtual courses, and publishes all manner of resources throughout the year. In fact, we're releasing a series of fact sheets and videos now focused on organic grain issues. And you can find all those in our newly relaunched resource library, and we'll put a link in the chat also if you want to take a look at that now or probably save it for later. If you haven't done so already, I highly recommend signing up for the OATS newsletter mailing list to keep up to date on these resources and our in-person and virtual training events like this one here. And we'll put the link to that in the chat now. And finally, your feedback is very important so that we know how we're doing and can get direction on bringing you the info that you want to know and the guests that you want to hear from. We do a brief poll before the episode. It's only 3 questions. And a short survey after, and these are crucial. This poll should be showing up now on your screen for the before one. If you'd be so kind, take, 12 seconds and just fill it out briefly. And then the one at the end, it takes maybe 45 seconds, but it's just a big help to us to know what we're doing well and know what we can be doing better. Okay, that is it for housekeeping. Let's get started with today's discussion. Weed management in beans. Our guests today are Sophie, Rivest-Auger, and Matt Sattelberg. And let me please apologize to Sophie and all French speakers immediately for my poor French pronunciation. But I hope the attempt is what's key. Sophie is the Organic Field Crop Advisor for Quebec's Center for Expertise and Transfer in Organic and Local Agriculture. Her professional practice emphasizes the balance in agroecological systems, and it's a vision centered around weed control, soil health, crop rotation, and the addition of organic matter. I heard great things about Sophie from some colleagues in Ohio, and I was so glad that she agreed to join us. And it's just so nice to have different perspectives all the way up there in Quebec. So, Sophie, thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. And we also have Matt Sattelberg, whose name I'm able to pronounce a little bit better, but I'm going to get there, Sophie. And I've been happy to know Matt for several years from my time in Michigan. He grew up on his family's farm in the thumb of Michigan. And for over 10 years, Matt's been farming full-time with his brother on their certified organic farm. Matt does the cultivation on a variety of organic field crops, including food-grade dry beans and soybeans. And he also helps run Bayshore Sales, where he sells the full line of Hodson-Bickler cultivators and camera hitches. So in my opinion, between Matt and Sophie, we have an incredible resource of knowledge here on managing weeds in beans. And so I'm really excited to speak with them. I assume that you all are tuning in today because you want to learn something. As we're talking, I hope that you'll share any questions that you have in the chat so that I can pose your questions to our guests. I'll also do my best to save 10 minutes at the end where you can unmute and ask questions yourself, but no guarantees because in my experience, time flies once we start talking about weed control. Okay, let's jump in. Enough background. So here with Sophie and Matt, and if I could start off the first question, when I was first getting into organic weed control, and a lot of times when I talk to farmers about organic weed control, we get so excited about shiny pieces of metal, right? And all the different cultivators and finger weeders and everything. And I could talk about that forever. But what I found is that often that's not the most important piece of weed management, or it's not the place where a lot of people need to start. And so I want to get to cultivators and shiny pieces of metal a little later in the conversation, but I want to kind of start with the big picture. And so before I ask some specifics, I'd like to ask Sophie and then Matt, kind of where do you think weed control starts with beans? Does it start the moment you plant? Does it start a week before with a stale seed bed? Does it start 5 years before with your crop rotation? Where would you say weed control starts with beans, Sophie?
For me, it would start in the fall before. To us, the rotation usually is grain corn, then soybean, then wheat. So all the corn residues, often we try to moldboard plow them.
Yep.
So we have to have a very perfect moldboard plowed field. So very low residue in surface. The plow has to be like very well reversed, and then it spend the whole winter like this, and in the spring we start over with at least 2 passes of heavy cultivator, and then we roll, and then we are ready to seed. But definitely get rid of the residues in the fall, and then in the spring have a really good seed bed preparation, very firm, and not wait too long for the ground to be green cover before starting the cultivation in the spring, I would say.
Okay. I'm going to ask you a follow-up question on that, but let me also turn to Matt. Matt, in kind of the big picture, where would you say weed control starts for beans?
I would agree. The fall is where it really starts for that year. But you keyed into something that really is overlooked for many people is if you haven't done a good job managing your weeds year after year after year and shrinking your weed seed bank and
Yeah.
rotating your crops, it's hard to start even in the fall. You know, it's a long-term thing. And as you get further into it and you do a better job of managing those weeds year to year to year, it gets easier for your in-season control. You know, we're on year 22, I think, of organics here on our farm. And as we've gone and gotten better and better, our weed control is we have better tools too. But, you know, doing a better job of making sure we don't have those late season escapes. They might not hurt your yield at that point, but you're reseeding. So it really does. It is a long-term thing, but definitely I agree with Sophie in the fall. You know, we don't plow all of our corn residue the year before or in the fall. We do quite a bit of moldboard plowing on our farm, but we try and do it rotationally. I think that it's really important to not only rotate your crops, but also rotate your management practices of your tillage. If you do, it seems like, and I consider myself still young, but it seems like generations, we get the new shiny tool and all we do is chisel plow, or all we do is moldboard plow, or all we do is high-speed disc. You know, I think all of those have a really, really unique role in maintaining weed control. And there is no perfect tillage tool out there to do exactly what you need. But in order to do a good job with weed control in season, I think it is really crucial to size your matter, your organic matter, your residue, and make it so that it flows through whatever tools you're going to use. You got to think ahead of time. Am I going to use a tine weeder? Am I going to use a rotary hoe? You know, even flame weeding, if you have too much residue on top, can cause a problem. You know, you can do a lot of flame weeding even into soybeans post emerge, but if you have a bunch of residue there and it continues to burn, then you have a problem. You know, it has to be a quick hot thing and then go away. We experienced that a couple of years ago and found that the residue was not a good thing for that. You know, we had these little pockets of soybeans that didn't quite make it. Now, we didn't see much at the end. We planted 180,000, so we had a good enough stand that everything filled in and had a good crop. But just things like that. Yeah, it's a long-term thing. We've played around with, we used to do a lot like what Sophie was talking. We would run 2 heavy cultivations in the spring after our fall tillage. We've tried to do a better job with our first pass and get it level and fine. And now we're finding that if we can do that and run like an 88-foot tine weeder harrow right before planting, or even planting into a stale seed bed with only 1 field cultivation pass and then tine weeding 48 hours after, less compaction makes less weeds. And you're not re-stirring those weed seeds up and causing them to germinate again.
Yeah, you guys are making me think of like an iceberg, or the tip of the iceberg, where in season, sure, you can control all the weeds you want, but it's maybe the tip of the iceberg. And what's really important is multi-season reducing that weed seed bank so that you've got less weeds coming. You guys just brought up so much. I feel like we could spend literally like 8 hours unpacking that, but let's walk through a little bit. So let me drill down or focus on the crop rotation. And so maybe kind of just starting with Sophie, but then we just expanding out. Sophie, why do you put beans in between corn and wheat? And then the bigger picture question is, when people are thinking about a rotation and where to put beans, what are ideas of where beans fit in a rotation that both helps the beans and also can help with weed problems? Yeah.
I would say that we don't plan the rotation for beans, we plan the rotation for corn. Here, if we don't do a very good, like heavy cover crop the year before the corn, it's not possible to grow a good corn. Here we are highly regulated on phosphorus. So let's say for a corn crop, we cannot put more than 8-9 tons per hectare of chicken manure. So that would make about 75 kilos of nitrogen available for the season.
Mm-hmm.
So if we don't have a good cover crop, that's going to cover a good 60 to 75 kilos of nitrogen per hectare, we cannot do a good corn crop. So either you're a dairy producer and you grow hay, and then you do your corn after hay, or you have to do your corn after a good winter wheat crop. Then you have the time to grow a good cover crop, and then you can do a good corn. So that's why the soybean is in between corn and wheat. But we don't necessarily plan the rotation for soybean. It's really for corn.
Got it. So you're saying the rotation is kind of driven by the fertility needs of the corn, which has higher fertility needs than other stuff.
Exactly.
Okay. And maybe Matt, similar question to you. But yeah, and what's hard is we're having a generalized conversation, whereas a farm is going to want to tailor their rotation to problem weeds, problem fertility issues. But Matt, can you tell us kind of big picture, how are you designing your rotation to deal with weeds, even though you may also be designing it for fertility or residue or other reasons?
So yeah, our rotation is corn and beans pretty much back and forth, with a cover in between. And we typically target the fields that are cleaner to be in our dry edible beans. So we kind of pick and choose how we rotate through them. So if we have, we don't typically grow 50% soybeans, 50% dry beans, or a quarter and 50%, I should say. It's usually more dry edible beans, but we definitely do. Soybeans will take a lot more abuse in season for tillage and for weeding than what dry edible beans will. So that's kind of the way that we play our rotation. Other than that, we don't really have a lot of forgiveness in our rotation for what's available for contract. I mean, that's kind of where our rotation really stems from. We would like to grow wheat or something like that if it's, something that's a marketable, sellable product at a price that makes sense. That's the biggest problem, is that it just, our bankers don't like zeros. So we gotta make sure that we can do things that are feasible. But yeah, we tend to put, so we go back, when we're going back and forth between corn and beans, I said there's covers between. typically in front of corn, we'll have it be a cover that can stay green. So it'll make it through freeze. So like a rye, or if we can get tillage radish or something like that in. So like our snap beans or our green beans come off early enough, we can get Austrian winter peas and tillage radish. We like to leave those sometimes and let them overwinter and come back in the spring and terminate them in the spring. In front of corn, we do not like, so after beans, we do not like a stay green cover crop. We want that cover crop to die in the winter, so we don't harbor bugs, we don't have the insect pressure in the spring, soil warms up quicker, everything like that. So those are our determining factors, I guess, as much as we can rotate.
Okay. So we're talking through rotation. We're thinking of all the different constraints and things we're trying to hit with our rotation, from market to fertility to everything. So next thing you guys touched on was tillage. And Matt, I thought you put it really well. You said something like, we rotate our tillage just similar to how people rotate their crops. Could you guys say more about tillage? How can tillage be a tool for weed control, even though you're doing it whatever months or years before the crop is in the ground?
So I really like the moldboard plow for weed control. It does a nice job of burying the weed seed, especially if you have something that turns really well. Sophie was talking about having a good inversion on your soil. There's a lot of truth to that, and having that soil flipped over. But we got to be careful on our soils. We have to be really careful about burning through our organic matter too quickly that way. So, using something like a disc ripper, like an 870 case disc ripper is the one that comes to my mind. And it leaves the residue. It still sizes and mixes, but it leaves more of the residue on top. You want to make sure that you're not burying all of that organic matter every year in our soil situations. I mean, I'm sure that there's places in the US that are totally different, and that's the other great thing. You said it's great to have a diversity. What works on our farm doesn't mean that it's going to work anywhere else, and what you're doing might work great for you, and that's awesome. The more you see of that, the more you learn of it, the more you can tailor it to yours. But yeah, the other thing that we've started doing, so we typically moldboard or we disc rip. We started running some more inline ripping, quite deep inline ripping for headlands, for what we call our tram lines. We don't have true tram lines, but because of GPS, we're pretty much driving in the same path every year. So we try, in the beans, after the beans come off, we try and rip all those tram lines down in the fall, shatter that compaction. So when we go into corn, that compaction's gone. After corn, we typically can't get in there to do that, because you want to do that when the soil is right. I mean, that's the other thing. Tillage isn't great unless your conditions are good. Now, you can't just leave it, but there's years that, like last fall, was extremely dry by us, and it was hard on machinery and it burned a lot of fuel, but it did a really good job of shattering compaction. So,
Right.
Just to do it isn't great. I mean, you got to have all those things play in, and weed control definitely has a part of that, because if you're working wetter, you're actually creating compaction in different areas, and making more problems long term for yourself through that compaction.
Yeah, really good point. You can have the best tool, but if the conditions aren't right, yeah, what's it doing? Sophie, can I ask a similar question to you? In Quebec, how are y'all using tillage as a weeding tool, if I can put it like that?
Yeah, but I would say, let's say the tillage practices are more for controlling residues, I would say, than controlling the weeds itself in the fall. So let's say we have two kind of main cover crop that we do in fall after wheat. We either do red clover interseeding in the wheat in the spring, and then after you harvested the wheat, you mow everything very close to the ground, and then the red clover comes back like very strongly. Or we do a mix of oat and peas. So if we do oat and peas, we can just speed disc them at the end of the fall to control the residues, and that we do that only in soils that are heavier, so they are harder to warm up in the spring and harder to dry. So those ones, they have to be disc in the fall. And for the clover, it's the same, but we have to do a mobile plowing, because if we don't do that, it comes back in the spring and it's too heavy in the spring. And if we are in lighter soil, we can do the mobile plow in the spring, or the disc for the oat and the peas. It can be done in the spring. So the goal is to control the erosion a little bit, or either control the amount of residue, and also increase the warming of the soil in the spring.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say that's for that part. Then for after soybean in the fall, often in lighter soil, we don't touch it unless there is perennial weeds. Let's say Canadian thistle or shade, I don't know, it's a kind of grass that has a big rhizomes.
Mm-hmm.
What's the name of that guy?
We might say quackgrass or something.
Yeah, exactly. So if we have that, we have to do a little heavy cultivator in the fall before, or either we have compaction and we have good soil condition, then we can rip at the compaction just under the compaction level. So this is very important to me. Compaction has a lot to it's driving your fertility, and is also driving a lot of weed species. So if you like, compaction should be a main goal here. Subsurface drainage and land leveling is
Mm-hmm.
the first thing that you have to address for soil compaction. If you have fields that are full of a pothole and stuff like that, obviously in organic grain you won't have much success. So
Yeah.
controlling compaction start with drainage, and then controlling weeds start with controlling the compaction. So
Okay.
that's
So if we're kind of thinking about this as a process in time or something, just to organize the conversation, we talked about tillage the fall before, and I heard you guys say we really want to be thinking about how tillage is going to manage our residue, how it's going to manage soil warming in the spring, and how it's going to manage compaction, and that's going to kind of dictate what type of tillage implement we choose and how we set it. Like Sophie's saying, maybe the depth for compaction. And now we come to the spring and we're almost to planting. But I know, Matt, you had mentioned, I think you said a stale seed bed, but tell us about spring tillage, whether it's stale seed bed or otherwise. What are we doing again to kind of stay ahead of the weeds even before we plant?
So on our farm, we've been typically we go out one time with a heavy field cultivator, make sure we get everything knocked down and level. Both of ours have coil tines and then a basket behind it. And then we pull a set of rolling harrows behind that yet. So we're trying to make sure that, because if you don't break up the lumps the first time and they bake in the sun, you're going to have little rocks or clods that you kick around all year, and it's really hard to control weeds with that.
And
So,
maybe, Matt, we should just say, sorry, that in the thumb, you guys have a fair amount of like silty clay. Does that sound right?
we do, yeah. It's highly variable, but yeah, we can get pretty sticky and we can get cloddy.
Okay.
So if we can get everything knocked down that way, that's preferred the first time. And if we can maintain it with like a harrow or a weeder that is wider, we can get up to 90 feet wide, 88 feet wide, and control the weeds, keep the soil fit the way it needs to, so that we can get planted. We're not running something so heavy across the field, making all that compaction. can run a lot lighter tractor pulling something like that. The other thing that we found is if you can get a level enough fit job at any point, either in the fall or early spring, get it leveled out. If it's a later planted like soybeans, and you get into a rainy season, if it's all level and flat, you can go out there with something like a harrow, a tine weeder, open it up, and you can actually get planted a few days earlier than anybody else could if they had to wait for a field cultivator, because it's that much heavier, running a wider shovel. You're bringing up what we call slabs. You're turning up mud balls instead of just working the ground and opening it up.
So you're saying something like the flatter you can get your soil surface, it gives you the opportunity to run your tools really shallow, which gives you the opportunity to get in sooner after a rain.
Yep. And honestly, like with our tine weeders, we can go in 3 to 4 inches deep and do a good job, even if it's wetter. We're not going to, because that tine is so narrow, we're not going to make that compaction like we would with a shovel off of a field cultivator. So we can open it up so that it can breathe, and you can get that moisture out of there, and it's warming up your soil as well. Now you can get on there to plant it sooner. The little bit of stale seed bed it's not true stale seed bed because it wasn't worked the fall before, but early spring working, if it's a field that is not a weedy field, and we can fit it down early, and then we can just leave the crust there and plant on top of it, that works fine too. I mean, you're one less pass, less compaction. Then the first pass that we do would be our blind cultivation, which is at the normal time that we're going to do our blind cultivation. We totally eliminated one more set of wheel tracks out there. So.
Okay.
But do you feel like that if you prepare, you almost do the seedbed preparation in the fall before, that if you get a very rainy and windy winter, you have a lot of soil loss?
You definitely can if you get it too fine and too flat. Now, we don't typically fine it up a lot in the fall. We're just trying to make it as level as possible. So it's not typically seed. You're not ready to seed yet at that point, but early spring, definitely you want to get out there when you can and get it leveled the rest of the way and fined up. So
in the fall, you leveled up with the speed disc, you said? Sorry, I kind of missed it.
No. So in the fall, we're trying to make sure that our plow is set level and doing a good job, which that obviously you're going to have to run a field cultivator over in the spring. But the other one would be the disc ripper. We don't, on our farm, we don't typically use a speed disc at all, just because we have shallow topsoil. So if we run discs and things like that, rotary hose, we tend to get a lot of compaction really quickly. And with compaction comes a lot of grass and other weeds. So,
are you finding this conversation useful? Hit the thumbs up button to help others discover it too. And if you'd like more conversations like this, click subscribe and turn on the bell icon for notifications. Let's keep on moving. I mean, we could stop and talk about spring tillage for a while, but there's so much to talk about. So, okay, we did our spring tillage, and now we're coming to planting. And to my mind, there's a lot you can do at planting to kind of be preventing or dealing with weeds, both with the timing of the planting, the depth of the planting, the density in the row, the spacing between the rows. So if I could put it to both you, when that important day comes for planting, how are you thinking about all that, planting time, row spacing, density to manage weeds? How can you be thinking about that during planting?
So we grow everything on 22-inch rows. So we'd be considered narrow rows for most of North America, but we've done 30-inch row organic. We've done 22-inch row organic. We like the 22s just because you get shade out quicker. As far as the population, we can push a little bit higher population in corn, typically in a 22-inch row. Soybeans, we're shooting for 180,000. In beans, in general, our thought is if there's not a bean there, there's going to be a weed there. You need to have them thick enough that they're going to canopy quick. You don't need to overpopulate for sure. I mean, you don't need to go out there and just go crazy, but you want to make sure that you got enough beans to get yourself canopy quickly. That's definitely going to help you with your weed control for sure.
Yeah.
Here, I would say that 95% of our clients are growing in 30 inches rows. A few of bigger farm have shift to the 20 inches rows, and I have one client who's growing a little further north, and he's growing in 15 inches rows. Here in northern climates, we definitely have advantages to grow in narrower rows. Sorry.
Yeah.
The soybeans are not very bushy. They are more, they have less branch. So it's easier to have a close canopy when you're narrowing the rows.
Yeah.
Now that we are using more like specialized equipment and more precise equipment in weeding techniques, it's very easy to cultivate narrow rows, which in the past with just like the heavy cultivators, like the single sweep cultivators, it was very hard to do it in narrow rows. But now it's much simpler with the more modern equipments. So, and also because the beans are less bushy, we tend to have very much higher population. Let's say in grain per hectare, it would be more about 500 Ks, 500,000 seeds per hectare. And in corn also it's about 90,000 seeds per hectare. So we tend to increase population quite a bit to be very aggressive in weeding control as well.
Mhm. Okay, so I think now we can make our way to some shiny metal. So we've planted our soybeans, and Matt earlier had just mentioned a pre-emergence pass. So Sophie and Matt, can you guys walk us through why is that pre-emergence pass so important, at least in my opinion? Why is it so important? And the two tools I would think of for pre-emergence are either rotary hoe or tine weeder. And how do you think about using one or the other? Yeah, and you know, we're starting with maybe a pre-emergence pass, but often continuing for quite a ways. Yeah, how do you guys use those tools before the beans come up and after?
Yeah, so our rule of thumb is we've like I said, we tend to stay away from things that roll on our ground, so we don't use the hoe much. We do have a double rotary hoe that we built, just modified a yetter to double frame so that we have two sets of wheels to hit over the row. There's a lot of times that it would probably be good to have a single over a double. Now I think the better weed control that we have now, the single would be enough for what we would need to do a lot of times. But typically we're blind cultivating with our harrows, because they're the tine weeder, because we don't want to roll through it. The other thing is a lot of times, if you don't get a rain, don't make a cross, the rotary hoe is not going to do near as much as what it could or should, or what you want. So the harrow, the tine weeder, is going to be a lot better suited for getting those hair root weeds out of the ground, leveling things off, which that can be a challenge as well. We haven't touched on that because that always tends to be one of the questions that people ask me. I had to put my beans in deep because I ran out of moisture. So I used my row cleaners, pushed the units down, got everything pushed out of the way so I could get to the moisture. Now I've got 4 inches of dry dirt between my rows. What's that going to do to my emergence? You know, and I guess I don't know if it's right, wrong, or whatever, but what I tend to tell people is if it needs to be weeded, you have to weed it. You can't just leave it go and say they won't push through. If it doesn't need to be weeded, if you're scouting well and you don't see those weeds out there, I don't know that I would go bury them. I mean, you got to be careful because when you come back to do whatever your next pass is and your beans are up 2 to 3 inches or whatever, and you got 5 inches of dirt, it's going to be tough. But it's a year to year, and half the time you might as well flip a coin, because you're going to be wrong some of the times and right some of the times. But
Yeah.
that tends to be a question that a lot of people have, is how do you deal with that when you do have to get the moisture and to plant, especially in beans. Where I guess that would be one instance that the rotary hoe might be a little bit better, but I don't know if you would get the weeds that you need to get, because the rotary hoe is definitely not going to level your field out like a tine weeder would. So
Yeah, I feel like that's a crucial point. You know, people sometimes think, oh, what's the right tool? What's the perfect tool? Which one's better? And what you're saying is something like, well, if I have a crust, the rotary hoe can be great, but if I don't, then it's not, and I need a tine weeder. And so it's not really about what's better, it's about what conditions of soil and weed and crop is each one good for.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I think for us, it tends to be our first pre-emerge pass tends to be, late season. If you're into later soybeans or into dry beans, is can be as early as 24 hours after planting. And that's something that people really need to pay attention to. If your soils are warm, you need to be scouting your fields and looking at your crop stages. If you are sprouted and pushing towards the crust, and your weeds are already sprouted, you need to be out there early enough that you can get deep enough to be effective. Because if you wait too long and now you're pushing through the crust and you need to get down to get those weeds out, you might have to be more aggressive than what you want to be. Now, soybeans are fairly forgiving, but corn especially, you can't be digging in there too deep. When your sprouts are coming through, you break those off, and you won't have the stand that you need. So
Sophie, when Matt was talking about getting in maybe 24 hours after planting, I saw you were nodding vigorously. Could you just say a word about your experience with getting in right after planting, and also what tools work well there?
Oh yeah, definitely. Let's say here when we start seeding, the soil is not even at 10 degrees in the morning when we start like the first seed. And when we finish seeding, often we plant the bean in a soil that is already 20 degrees. So the difference of germination in between those two windows can be 4 days. Like, let's say you put a seed in the ground and it's not even 10 degrees in the morning, 10 degrees Celsius. It will take maybe 6 days to be at the right level to do the tine weeder. And let's say when you plant the seeds, the soil is nice and moist and 20 degrees. In 24 hours, you will have your little hook that is about 1 inch to the surface. So you, just as Matt said, you had to be a very, very good and dedicated scouter. You have to be in the field. You follow your every seed, every field by the seed date, and you have to be ready to tine weed. And let's say this spring we had a lot of rain. Like, we didn't seed in good condition. We made clogs. It was not very pretty. So we had to do the combination of rotary hoe to break the surface and then do the tine weeder, because just the tine weeder was not doing the proper job to move the soil parts, because it was too cloggy and too crusty. So we did use a lot of combination, and sometimes 2 passes of rotary hoe before the tine weeder. So it really depends on the condition, but the seed placement is super important, and also the uniformity of soil moisture. And for that, you have to have good cultivation before seeding. If you have a cultivator that is doing a lot of, let's say, I don't know.
hills and valleys.
Yes,
Nice.
that's it. You will have one planting unit that is gonna plant in very nice, firm, wet soil, and maybe the other row right beside it, it's gonna seed in stuff that is all dry and crumbly. So you will have regular germination in between rows if you don't make sure that your cultivator is doing a very flat job. And also for the seed placement, we really tend to seed either corn or soybean at least 1.5 inches. So we have a good time period for tine weeder and rotary hoe.
Yeah, one thing I feel like I hear both of you saying is that all the steps add up. You know, you don't want to just say, well, this is fall tillage and this is spring tillage and that's planting, but yeah, the condition that you're leaving the field in before every step is going to influence the next one. And you know, sometimes you got to roll with the punches, like Matt's saying about planting deep, and you've got ridges, but just know that's going to impact what happens next.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's
to be a good organic producer, you have to be an amazing farmer. You
well
have
put.
to be perfect in every step. You have to be very knowledgeable about agronomy. You have to be good at machinery, like adjustment of machinery. You have to be very conscientious about every little step because we don't have any other help after that.
Yeah. Okay, so time is flying because we're talking about weeding tools. So I'm going to keep us moving along from our soybean perspective here. So we planted our beans. We were out there scouting, you know, hours, 24 hours later, thinking about when are they going to emerge? Can we get our pre-emergence pass in? We do that by hook or by crook, maybe with the tine weeder. Maybe we got to make 2 passes with the rotary hoe going opposite ways, whatever that is. And now the beans are either at spike stage where they're just poking up, or at hook stage where they're up and the kind of bean part is hooked over. And in my experience, that's a dangerous part of the game because they can get ripped out pretty easy. So I'm curious to ask both of you, at either that spike or hook stage, are you running any tools at that time? Do you just stay out of the field? What tools, you know, are you comfortable using? Yeah, if that makes sense.
Typically, we stay out of the field at that point, but if we have a mess where we are going to have to save something, we have tine weeded in that stage. We have rotary hoed in that stage. I was surprised with the tine weeder how little it looked like I was killing a bunch of them, and we did it side by side. So we got rained out in a planting and dry edible beans, which are a little bit more susceptible yet to hook stage than what soybeans are because the neck is really thin and the bean is really big. And we had a round that we got planted, a round or two that we got planted before the rain. And then it was like 4 days later that we planted the rest of the field. And we thought about just working it up and planting it all together, but we tine weeded it because it was hooking and more of them made it than we thought it was gonna. And at harvest, you couldn't see any difference. The ones that we tine weeded and broke some of them off were just as good as the ones that we planted later. The other thing that we've played around with, and I mentioned it before, is burning at that stage. You got to be careful, but if you have weeds up that are a mess, go out there with your flame burner and you can do a really good job as long as you don't have the residue on top that's going to stay burning. That's a big no-no for soybeans because it will kill those beans if it burns too long. But we've done it both in dry edibles and in soybeans. Tend to try and like to do that just before they're pushing through the crust, like you can have more of the crust over top. That's more safety. You feel better about it. But we've done it a little bit later and still been okay as well. So.
Okay.
Yeah, same here. If we have been able to do the pre-emergence at right stage, usually we don't have to go back in the field before the cotyledon are widely open. But if we kind of lost the window for any kind of condition, for any kind of reason, we sometimes go with the tine weeder, but we make sure, let's say, that the tractor is going in that way. When we do a pre-emergent and it's very like safe, we put the tine that is touching the ground, that is in the tractor direction, so very aggressive.
Yeah.
But if we do it and let's say you have a little hook and you're gonna go play with the tine weeder in the hook, then we put the tine more like straight in the ground and we lower the speed, let's say 4 or 5 kilometers per hour. And then we do a very good job. It doesn't break the soybean that much. It's slower, it's more risky, but it
Yep.
does the job.
Okay, so it sounds like the goal is to not be in the field during spike or hook stage, but if you need to be,
We
tine
should-
weeder can be helpful, but hey, let's set it so it's less aggressive and just really be aware of that. Okay, so next question is, and only someone like me would get excited about this question, is when are we switching from a tine weeder or rotary hoe to a row crop cultivator? And let me say that I've talked to farmers, I think Matt in the past, if memory serves, but I've talked to other bean farmers that use their tine weeder, you know, as the beans get way bigger, people are comfortable using their tine weeder. So yeah, how are you deciding when to keep using the tine weeder and also when to switch to a row crop cultivator with sweeps, etc.?
So we've gone more to early cultivation. With switching over from the typical heavy American style cultivator to the lighter European style cultivator, with the finger weeders and having cutaway discs, camera guidance systems, being able to get so much closer to the row and have a definitive line on a weed kill, like the cutaway disc cutting, you know, extremely close, only leaving a small band of crust, and then the finger weeder totally annihilating the crust. We feel like we get a lot better weed kill percentages that way. We used to do a lot more post-emerge weeding with a tine weeder. And I still would if time allowed, especially in soybeans. Soybeans actually seem to yield better the more they get beat up. So we've done post-emerge weeding where the beans were over knee high. As long as you don't have blossoms on them, you can defoliate, and they'll just bush harder and harder and set their nodes closer together and give you more yield. So, I mean, to a certain extent, I think the most that we've ever done post emerge was either 6 or 7 passes with a tine weeder, and we would cultivate, then wait 24 hours, then we would tine weed, and then we would cultivate, you know, 4 days later, and then tine weed. And sometimes we were tine weeding in 2 different directions. We had a field that had a lot of grass in it, and that was why we did so much in that field. It was a lighter field, and we would actually turn and go 90 to the rows with one of our big 88-foot weeders, and you could drag the grass. A lot of it you were getting out completely, but some of it you were just moving it in between the rows. And when you came back with a cultivator, you could actually cut it out of the row. So with the grass being a root system, not a tap root, you know, it's got a root ball. You can grab that with the hooks, like Sophie was saying, you know, get your hooks facing forward so that you can grab a hold of it. That works really good. So, but typically we are as early as possible, and it all depends. The earliest possible really depends on the fineness of the soil. So if you have lumpy soil, you're not going to get in there as early, and it's not going to work good with a tine weeder either, because it's going to want to knock those lumps around into your plants. But you know, we've done stuff that was only 3 inches, 2.5, 3 inches tall with a cultivator. It can be pretty slow, but if that's your best tool, it's still a lot quicker and a lot cheaper than hand labor. So I mean, when you're out there pulling your hair out because you're not moving fast, just think about how much faster it is than sending people walking through it. And
Good reframe.
Yeah. To me, it really depends of the stage of the weed, depending if I'm gonna use the rotary hoe or the tine weeder. Let me share my screen just a little. Can you show my screen? Can you see my screen?
I think it's just loading. Yep, now I can.
Okay, so if I have like very young weeds and the tine arrow is doing the job, I'm gonna do it that way. But as soon as the roots of the weeds are developing and it's anchoring, the tine weeder doesn't do much. So we have to change equipment, and sometimes we see a weed stage that we think it's gonna work, but it's not working. So we just change equipment, and we don't think very long about that. It's just, let's try the tine weeder. It's not working. We change equipment. That's it. That's all. And as Matt is saying, we are using a lot this combination of tine weeder and row cultivators. But we do it, let's say, in the other way. Often what we do is we create a little hill around the soybean. It's burying the weeds, and then we will wait for, let's say, 10 days or the next rain. So next rain is bringing a new generation. And then we tine weed the field, even if the soybean is very big. And then we recreate this hill again. So
Yeah.
nation, like let's say in the same day, tine weed and make the hill again. So we do a hill, we destroy the hill, we do a hill, we destroy the hill. So we do like this, maybe let's say in heavier soil, it's gonna be 2 times during the season. And in lighter soil, it can be 4, 5, 6 times, I don't know, depending how big is the field. But it's a lot of trial and error. Like we could write books about weedings, but really we have to be in the field and we are trying stuff. Like let's say last week we had very, very young corn and it was very crusty. And I did want to use the tine weeder in the corn, which we usually don't do, but with pressure, constant pressure tine weeder, now we can go in the corn. So we kind of undid the cross with the finger weeder, and then we did the tine weeder in the corn, which we usually don't do, but we had such a small window, we had to do something, and that. But we spent the whole morning trying different equipment and finding out that this was working.
Okay, so time has flown once we're talking about weeding tools. And so my last question for each of you is, speaking of trying different tools, Sophie, is something like this. One, what's your experience of finger weeders in beans? And two, kind of ending on a big picture question, do you think it's reasonable for any farmers or advisors listening to this? Can people think, I can get to a point with my weed management where I don't have to hand weed my organic beans? Is it reasonable to get to a point where often, maybe not all the time, you're not hand weeding beans?
We never
So maybe,
hand weed beans. We
yeah.
never.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of set that expectation of, hey, this is possible if you have the right tools and the right observation. You don't need to be out there.
No.
And could you say, Sophie, before we turn over to Matt, could you say a word about if you guys are using finger weeders with soybeans and kind of when you're bringing them in or what they're doing?
To me, I would say that the finger weeder completely changed the way we kept control on weeds, either in corn, soybeans, sunflower, dry bean, everything. Like I would not do such a good job in cleaning field without my finger weeder.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
I would agree with that. We've once we've gone to finger weeders, I would never want to go without them. You can do so much more with them. We typically don't run them on our last pass in our beans or the last pass in corn. But other than that, we're running finger weeders from the first pass on through. So it's one more mode of action in the row. And the reason that we don't run them usually on the last pass is because we're trying to create a little bit more of a hill, especially in the corn, cover brace roots. And a lot of times the finger weeder, from what we've seen, it'll tend to peak the center higher, but then it'll also knock your edges down. So when you start getting rains or if you're irrigating, it actually makes for less of a hill quickly. So, yeah, that would be now, like in some of our dry edibles, we want to keep them flat, especially like our snap beans. So we'll run the finger weeders all the way through those because it'll keep that from creating so much of a ridge. So
we're running short on time, but I can't help myself. I wanted to ask you each one more question, which is something like, is there something you feel like farmers don't know or kind of are missing often in terms of controlling weeds and beans? I know earlier, Matt, you kind of mentioned, hey, the impact of planting so deep. But yeah, just another big picture question. Is there something where you feel like, I think farmers are often forgetting this?
I would say in the spring, people are working the ground too deep. first passage often is way too deep. It can be just as shallow as to erase the tire print.
Mhm.
The first pass as at least. And then second thing is they are too afraid to hurt the crop. Like
Well put.
soybean, just put a lot of population and make sure that when they are very young, you destroy a percentage at each passage, so you're sure that you're hard enough on the weeds. I'm
Mhm.
always the person who's like, go man, just crunch, just get rid of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, something that I've said to a lot of customers over the years when setting up a tine weeder is do what you're comfortable with, and then do one pass or one round where you're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And where it looks like you're just the people that I worked with from Austria, they said you're turning the field black. You know, it looks like something's not planted out there anymore. Then drive away from it. Don't look at it for 2 days. Don't
Yeah.
go back there and look at it the next day. Give it some time to recover. 90% of the time or better, you're going to come back and say, man, I'm going to do that next time. But then there's always that one time where you go too much and you really wish you didn't.
Sounds right. Time flies and time flew. Sophie and Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to work with me and sharing your experience with all of us on this Organic Advisor Call series. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
To you listeners out there, before you leave your desk, if you could take a moment to fill out our evaluation, it'll take, I don't know, 45 seconds, and your opinion will really help us. So we'll put the link to that survey in the chat now, and feel free to just follow that and give us your thoughts. This is the second call of this 2025 series. We'll hope that you'll join us for the next one, which is Tuesday, July 22nd. And our topic will be tech in organic field crops. Now, Matt knows a heck of a lot about camera guidance and camera guided hitches, and we didn't even have time to talk about that today, but we will on our next call. Matt and some other experts will be joining us to talk about camera guidance, weeding robots, and drones in organic field crops. So I hope to see you there. I wish you a safe summer and just enough rain. And that's the end of our call series for today. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Yeah, see
Bye.
y'all. Thanks a lot.